I just need to get this down. The playground always looked ancient. When I was a kid, I don't think I ever saw it at its best. Honestly, I'm not even sure it ever had a best to begin with. The paint on the old metal structures was chipped, peeling off in random chunks, exposing the deep rust underneath. The swings would squeak with every swing, and the merry-go-round groaned like an old man trying to stand, while the aluminum slide was always scalding in the summer, no matter if it was in the sun or not. But we didn't care. As kids, we loved it. It was our place, tucked away at the edge of the woods, far from the reach of adults, except when they came calling us home for dinner. It was the only place where we could escape the pressures of school or family life. Even now, the memory of that place is still so clear. I can picture the twisted bars of the jungle gym, the crooked ladder leading to the slide, and the sandbox that was always more weeds than sand. But none of that mattered. We made it work just like kids always do. We owned that little corner of the world, not even noticing the decay or the overgrown edges. But there was something about that playground I can never forget. There was a game we played, though none of us ever really understood it. It wasn't like tag or hide and seek. It felt bigger, like it had its own rules, though no one ever explained them to us. To this day, I only remember bits and pieces. A chant we'd say, strange steps we'd take, and the way we'd laugh. Except when I think back on it, it doesn't sound like us. That laughter. It was off, almost like it came from somewhere else, sneaking into our game uninvited. Only as an adult, when I see kids playing, it sends a chill down my spine, like a memory poking at the back of my mind. My best friend, Natalie, loved that game more than anyone. She always seemed to know the rules, even though she never told us where she learned them. She had this grin, a crooked, mischievous thing, that made you feel like you were in on a secret, even if you didn't quite get it. I'd watch her, and when she started the game, her voice was always sure, as she recited that strange rhyme. The words sounded odd, like a tune you hum without knowing the lyrics, but when Natalie spoke them, they felt magical. Natalie and I had been friends for as long as I could remember. She was the kind of person who could make anything fun, who could turn even the dullest moments into an adventure. I'd follow her anywhere, into the woods, onto the creaky merry-go-round, or up the crooked jungle gym. I didn't even know why, but I always felt happiest when I was with her. Back then, I didn't understand the fluttery feeling I'd get when she laughed or looked at me. I just knew I liked being around her. And it wasn't just me. Everyone loved Natalie. She was bold in a way that made us believe we could be too, just by keeping up with her. And then one day she was gone. It happened at the playground. I remember that much, but the rest is like trying to catch smoke with my hands. 1 second, Natalie was there, leading the game like always. Her ponytail was swinging as she laughed, her voice so bright it could have chased away all the shadows under the trees. She was on the merry-go-round, spinning so fast that we were all yelling at her to slow down. And then, she was just gone. I don't mean she ran off to hide or went home when her mom called. She just wasn't there. One moment, she was laughing, and the next, the merry-go-round was still spinning, creaking louder than ever. We all froze, staring at it, thinking maybe she was hiding behind the bars or crouched down somewhere we couldn't see. But she wasn't. We called her name again and again, running all over the playground and even into the woods. Natalie! Natalie! Come on! Stop messing around! I shouted, my throat burning. None of us wanted to say it, but it felt like the playground had taken her. Like it had swallowed her up and hidden her somewhere we couldn't go. None of it made sense. It didn't feel real. I kept waiting for her to jump out and shout, "Gotcha!" But the longer we stood there, staring at that empty merry-go-round, the more it felt like something terrible had happened. We didn't get it. How could we? We were just kids. All we knew was that Natalie was gone, and we couldn't find her. The other kids, the neighbors, had run off to get their parents, but I stayed. That meant I was the only one who heard the sound coming from deep in the woods. A strange, low groan, like metal being bent or a musician dragging a bow across a cello's strings. A harsh, unsettling noise. I ran. The police combed the woods for weeks, but they didn't find anything. Eventually, the town moved on, and so did I, at least that's what I told myself. But the sound, and the memory of my friend, stayed in the back of my mind. I think about Natalie more than I'd like to admit. The way her laughter echoed through the trees, the flash of her sneakers as she climbed to the top of the jungle gym, the secretive glint in her eyes when she spoke that weird rhyme. She's still there, somewhere, in the corners of my mind and the shadows of my memories. I can't shake the feeling that I failed her, that I let her slip away when I should have held on tighter. Why am I telling you all of this? Why am I sharing this personal story on some website? I'm 34 now, and I can't stop thinking about it. Lately, it's been even harder to push it to the back of my mind. It's like a splinter, a sharp point that keeps poking me. No matter how much I try to ignore it, I tell myself it's just work getting to me, or the stress of juggling 2 jobs to make ends meet. But it got worse a week ago when I started having the same dream over and over. I was back at the playground, standing on the cracked asphalt that used to be a basketball court. The air smelled like rust and damp earth, the kind of smell that clings to old metal and forgotten places. In the dream, I could hear the familiar creak of the swings, the groan of the merry-go-round, and faint laughter, high-pitched, echoing as if it was underwater. And that strange groan, but louder than I'd ever heard it before. It made my chest tighten. That sound. It was too distorted to be comforting, and too familiar to ignore. I woke up drenched in sweat, the laughter still ringing in my ears like a taunt. Every time I had that dream, it felt like that sound was getting closer. I tried everything to make it stop. Doctor's orders, self-medication with weed, you name it. But every night, I ended up back at that cursed place. Each time, the details became clearer, sharper, and closer. I started noticing things I hadn't as a kid. The splintered wood of the slide, the twisted metal of the monkey bars, the strange symbols scratched into the peeling paint. They were crude, jagged shapes that seemed to shift the longer I looked at them, as though the dream itself didn't want me to understand. I've been lying to myself for a long time. I think it was 2 days ago that I woke up in a cold sweat, realizing the truth. Something was calling me back. I had failed Natalie, and I needed to go back to the playground to make it right. To stop that groan from taking her. It's no longer just about the playground. It's about Natalie. About that day, about the pieces of myself I left behind with her. I didn't know if I'd find answers, but I couldn't keep pretending. I had to go back. I told myself it was just a visit to family, an excuse to see familiar faces and reconnect. So one Friday after work, I gave in. I packed a small bag, just enough to make it seem like a regular trip, and got in my car. The drive felt like both a return and a journey into the unknown. The landmarks, old gas stations, crooked signs, and faded shops whizzed past like ghostly memories, stirring up feelings I'd buried for years. The town felt the same, but also different, like it had changed in small ways I hadn't realized until now. By the time I arrived, the sun was low, casting the town in soft gold and orange light. The evening made everything look still, almost frozen in time. I spent time with family, catching up on small talk and listening to stories that no longer held the same weight they once did. But even as I sat there, I could feel the pull. I knew where my thoughts were drifting, even though I didn't say a word. The playground wasn't far, and I could almost feel its presence, waiting for me to return. I sat across from my parents at the kitchen table, my fingers nervously tapping on the edge. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary, and the soft hum of my mom chopping vegetables filled the air. Dad sat at the window, sipping his iced tea, staring out into the yard. Everything about this moment should have been comforting, just like when I was younger. "Hey, Mom, Dad," I started, my voice quiet and hesitant. "Do you remember the old playground, the one by the woods?" My mom paused mid-chop, glancing at Dad. "Oh, sure. she said, smiling as she wiped her hands on a towel. That old place. You used to play there all the time with the other kids. Why? What about it? I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to find the right words. It felt awkward, like the words didn't quite belong in the air. I don't know. I've just been thinking about it lately, I muttered, unable to mask the unease creeping into my voice. Dad chuckled from the window, still not looking at me. That place? Good grief, it was falling apart when you were a kid. I remember when they tore down the slide. It was so rusted they thought someone might get hurt. Yeah, I said, keeping my eyes fixed on my hands in my lap. But do you remember the older kids telling stories about it? Weird stories? Mom raised an eyebrow, still focused on her chopping. Stories? Well, there were always rumors, especially around Halloween. I think some kids thought it was haunted or something. She shrugged, as if it were just another silly tale. We always told you to stay away from there after dark. I couldn't help myself. What kind of stories? I don't remember any. I pushed, my heart hammering in my chest, hoping they'd say something, anything, to make sense of the growing dread I felt. Dad looked over at me with a grin, like he was about to share a funny memory. Oh, you know how kids are. Ghost stories. Some said the playground was built on cursed land, or that the swings would move on their own. The usual stuff. But honestly, I think it was just to scare the younger kids so the older ones could smoke and mess around. I wanted to argue, to tell them it wasn't just a silly story. But as I looked at them, I realized they had no clue. To them, it was just a distant memory, nothing more. I was the only one who truly remembered, really remembered. Did they even remember Natalie? Dad chuckled and took another sip of his tea. They used to say that about all kinds of places when we were kids. Just a way to make things more exciting, you know? It's just a playground. Nothing to it. Yeah, I lied, forcing a weak smile. I guess you're right. Even as they returned to their easy chatter about dinner, I could feel the weight of their words pressing down on me. It was all so casual to them, just a relic of childhood. As I sat there, listening, the silence around us seemed to grow thicker, more oppressive. I wanted to ask them more, to see if they knew anything else, but I couldn't bring myself to. They didn't understand. They hadn't seen what I saw, and for the first time in a long time, I wondered if they ever would. After dinner, I told them I was going to drive around and check out some of the old places I used to hang out. They cheerfully suggested spots like where the Blockbuster used to be or the old skating rink. But I had only one destination in mind. The playground was still there, though it looked far worse than I remembered. The swings hung from rusted chains, their seats cracked and sagging. The merry-go-round had tilted to one side, its base half buried in the earth like the land was trying to swallow it. The slide was nothing more than a skeletal frame now, its jagged edges sticking out like broken bones. The sandbox had nearly been swallowed whole by weeds, their spindly stalks reaching up past my knees. Even the jungle gym, once a centerpiece of our games, was now a twisted ruin of metal. The air was thick, dense with a stillness that felt wrong. It wasn't just quiet. It was a silence that seemed to press against my ears, making every tiny sound feel too loud. My footsteps on the cracked asphalt echoed, intrusive, as if I were trespassing on something sacred, or something forbidden. A chill ran through me, sharp and cold, the kind that creeps down your spine when you know you shouldn't be somewhere but can't make yourself leave. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the remnants of the place that once held so much of our childhood. The memories flooded back. Leah's laugh, the strange game we used to play, and the way the shadows always seemed to stretch farther than they should, even in broad daylight. It all felt wrong now, like the playground had been waiting for me to return. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to move, to turn back to the car and leave this place behind forever. But I couldn't. Not yet. Something was here. Something waiting. And deep down, I knew I wouldn't leave until I found it. The wind kicked up, swirling dry leaves and dust around my feet as I took a step toward the swings. that last day with Leah running through my mind. The cold wind howled around me, and the swings creaked as they swayed slowly, back and forth, like they carried invisible riders. The sound grated on my nerves, each groan digging deeper into a memory I wished I could forget. I hesitated before sitting down, the cold metal chains digging into my palms. The moment I settled, a wave of déjà vu crashed over me, stealing my breath. I gripped the chains tighter, trying to steady myself, but it was useless. The sensation was overwhelming, like being swept into a tide that pulled me toward something far older than I could grasp. I remembered this. Sitting on these swings, the faint sound of laughter, high-pitched, distorted, and wrong, carried by the wind. It was laughter I never wanted to hear again. And then I heard it. "Ethan?" The voice was faint at first, a lilting whisper that seemed to come from every direction, yet nowhere at all. My name, spoken in that sing-song tone, sent a chill creeping down my spine. "Ethan?" The sound grew louder, closer, yet I saw no one. The playground was empty, a desolate ruin of rust and decay. "Leah," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, as if it had forgotten how to speak. There was no answer. The moon had risen above the trees, casting its pale light over the cursed place I sat in. My eyes darted around, senses alert, preparing for something. Anything. On the slide, where faded graffiti had once stained the metal with crude drawings and insults, new symbols had appeared. They weren't painted on. They grew from the metal itself, faintly glowing in the dimming light. Their jagged edges shifted, as if they were alive, forming words that made my stomach plummet. "To leave this place, you must win the game. But play it wrong and here you'll remain." The game. The words blurred as I stared at them, pulsing in rhythm with the frantic beat of my heart. Then, like a door cracking open, the memories came rushing back. The rules, the steps, the twisted ritual we had followed so blindly as children, not understanding its true nature. My adult mind finally comprehended what I couldn't as a child. This wasn't a simple game. This was something far darker. The game. How was it played? I could hear Leah's voice clearly in my mind, her excitement bubbling over. "Okay, Ethan, listen closely," she would say, always eager to begin. "We have to say the words or it doesn't start. It's the rules, and the rules are everything." I remembered how she'd lead us, the words spilling from her lips like a chant we were all supposed to know by heart. Round and round we spin and fall. The shadows call. The game begins. The memory hit me like a wave, and suddenly, I was back there, standing before the merry-go-round. The once vibrant colors had faded to a sickly rust, the paint worn away by years of neglect. I heard the chant again, Leah's voice in my head. But it wasn't just the words that startled me, it was the way they felt. The words acted like a key turning in a lock. As soon as the chant filled my mind, the playground seemed to wake. The air around the merry-go-round thickened, pressing in on me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. There was no time to think. Before I knew it, I was standing on the platform, my feet unsteady. In the distance, I could hear the faint echo of children's laughter. But it wasn't just any laughter, it was wrong. It sounded too high-pitched, too sharp, like it was coming from underwater, or from somewhere much darker. Even though everything felt foggy, I knew what I had to do. If there was any chance of leaving, I had to play. "Don't touch it," Leah's voice whispered, her excitement building. "Not yet. Just wait for it to start. Hold on tight and don't let go." I was alone, but I knew I wasn't. In the deepest distance, I heard that familiar groan, the one that haunted me as a child. Terror gripped me as the playground seemed to shift in the moonlight. I wanted to run, but then I heard it. The voice, soft but unmistakable, broke through the fog. "Don't leave me again, Ethan." I stepped forward, placing my foot on the merry-go-round. Instantly, it groaned beneath me, the sound low and ominous, like the groan of something ancient. I wasn't sure if it was the weight of the chant or the pull of something deeper, but I felt it. Round and round, we spin and fall. The shadows call. The game begins. I chanted, as steady as I could, my voice trembling but determined. The merry-go-round started moving, slowly at first, just a slight shift beneath my feet. How it even managed that was beyond me. It should have come off its pivot, but there was a subtle tug, and then, with a sudden lurch, it began to spin. The force grew, and I leaned forward to keep my balance. I wasn't supposed to touch it yet. I knew that much, but the merry-go-round continued to spin faster, its pull becoming stronger, dragging me into a dizzying spiral. I should have been thrown off, but the laws of physics seemed to have no power here. I felt myself being pulled into the center of the playground's twisted toy. The ground beneath it dissolved, replaced by a swirling void that threatened to consume everything. My heart hammered in my chest, and I knew this was it. I clung to one of the bars, the cold, slick metal biting into my hands as the force of the spin threatened to drag me inward. I crouched, holding on with everything I had. The chant echoed in my head again, louder this time, weaving into my thoughts like an unstoppable tide. Round and round we spin and fall. The shadows call. The game begins. The words were like claws, reaching for me, making the air grow colder, denser. The darkness below seemed endless, like I could fall forever. The laughter, the wrong, shrill laughter, swirled around me, a chorus of voices calling my name, calling me to join them. I gritted my teeth, refusing to let go, my hands slick with sweat. The merry-go-round spun faster, the force threatening to snap my arms from their sockets. But then, as abruptly as it had begun, the spinning slowed. The world came back into focus. The void beneath me vanished, and the merry-go-round came to a halt, leaving me breathless, shaken, my heart still pounding in my chest. But the words, the chant, lingered, like they were suspended in the air, waiting for the next step. I hadn't realized my eyes were closed until I heard her voice again. Hearing it sent a sting of tears to my eyes, and I opened them, heart pounding. Ethan. I looked around, but I couldn't see her. Yet, I knew I had heard her. Her voice was unmistakable. The cracked asphalt stretched before me, looking as though it had been torn from the earth's core. The fissures oozed something dark and viscous, like tar or blood, staining the edges of the playground. The stench was suffocating, a rancid blend of rot and decay that twisted my stomach. I stumbled forward, gasping for air, but there was no time to recover. Something inside me, some deep, instinctive force, dragged me toward the sandbox, deeper into this nightmare. The sandbox had long been overtaken by nature. Weeds had grown thick and twisted, their gnarled stalks curling like blackened fingers, reaching toward me. But beneath the weeds, the sand shifted unnaturally. It didn't move like it should. It writhed as if something beneath was alive, waiting, pulling the grains toward a hidden abyss. My feet sank into the sand as I stepped forward, the ground giving way like the soft belly of a decaying corpse. Trembling, I dropped to my knees and dug, the sand shifting sickeningly beneath my fingers. And then I felt them cold and brittle. Bones. Small, fragile bones. I dug harder, the sound of cracking bone echoing in the night, until I uncovered them fully. They weren't just bones. They were wrong, delicate, and fragile, but they didn't feel like they belonged to any living thing. The moment my fingers brushed them, they crumbled into dust, blackened ash clinging to my skin like burnt remnants of something forgotten. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled back, heart racing. But the sand didn't stop. It shifted again, twisting and writhing, and as it did, the words began to form. The shadows watch. They'll take their due. Finish the game or they'll take you too. The words burned into my mind, the air growing icy, as if the temperature had dropped 100 degrees. I looked up, chest heaving, and froze. The shadows, they stretched unnaturally long, far too long, their edges curling like smoke, flickering in and out of focus. But they weren't just shadows anymore. They were figures. Children, twisted, malformed children. Their eyes were hollow, blackened voids, like empty sockets filled with darkness. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles, flickering like an old film reel, jerking and skipping. They didn't move closer, but I could feel them, their eyes burning into me. They were unblinking. They were hungry. The air thickened with their gaze, suffocating me, as if they were waiting for something. That groan, the one that had haunted me all my life, echoed again, too close, and it caused me to tremble uncontrollably. I knew deep down that they weren't just shadows. They were them, the children who had been lost, the ones who hadn't gone home. They had never left. Leah's form flickered into view. She wasn't how I remembered her, bright and full of life. No, she was hazy, like a half-formed dream I could barely grasp. Her voice came to me, soft and uncertain, as if she didn't fully understand what was happening, like a child trying to explain something too big for them to comprehend. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice trembling in the air around me. I didn't know. I thought we were playing." She hesitated, her figure twisting in the air, fading in and out, as if she couldn't quite hold herself together. "But it wasn't just a game, was it?" I felt her confusion, her pain, swirling around me like an icy wind. Her voice was so familiar, yet there was something wrong in the way she spoke now, like she was struggling to piece together a puzzle she didn't understand. "I played the game by myself," she whispered, her voice barely audible, heavy with sorrow. "I wasn't supposed to. Told me not to, but I did it anyway. I was supposed to play with you, but I wanted to play alone." Leah's voice trailed off, and I could feel the raw fear she had once felt, like the first time she realized what was really happening. "It took me, Ethan. It took me, and I didn't know." I took a step back, trying to make sense of her words, but they didn't fit. She sounded so young, so lost, like a child trying to grasp a story far too big for her. "What now?" I asked, my voice breaking as I looked at the little girl I had once known. "You must play the game, Ethan. You must. The game has to be finished." Her form flickered again, as though trying to hold itself together. "I've been waiting for you to come back, so we can finish it." Her words rushed out, a mixture of desperation and a childlike hope. She didn't fully understand what she was asking, but it was the only thing she had left. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her it wasn't possible, that she was gone, trapped in this place. But the words stuck in my throat, and her eyes, those pleading, childlike eyes, kept me frozen. "Please, Ethan." Her voice was so small now, barely a whisper. "You have to come back. Come back and finish it. We have to finish the game. We have to finish before you also break the rules." Her figure trembled again, her eyes wide with an innocence that slowly twisted into something darker, something I couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was something much worse. "I played it wrong, Ethan, but you can still win." The ground beneath me trembled as her words echoed in my mind. I didn't want to. I didn't want to play this game with her, at least not like this. But she was there, urging me forward, waiting for me to understand what I couldn't yet. And deep down, I knew I had no choice. The game wasn't over. It was waiting for me. I felt the weight of Leah's gaze pressing into me, her flickering form trembling. Her voice came again, soft but desperate, like an old riddle forced from her lips. "The rules," she said slowly, as though she was piecing them together in her mind. "You have to play hide and seek now, Ethan. If you are found, you stay." The words hung in the air, sickeningly familiar but twisted now, darker. I didn't know if Leah truly understood what it meant, what it really meant, or if she was just holding on to some last vestige of innocence. But the fear in her voice, the way she trembled, made it clear that this wasn't the game we once knew. Before I could respond, a shrill, high-pitched laugh echoed through the air. Sharp, wrong. A distorted child's laughter that sent a chill down my spine. I froze. The sound crawled up my back, burrowing deep, making my heart race. I turned toward the sound, blood running cold as I saw a small figure emerge from the shadows. It was hunched over, its limbs twisted in grotesque parody of a child's posture. Its eyes were wide black pits, staring straight into me. And then the voice came, a sweet, sinister chant, the words laced with an ancient malevolence. Ready or not, here I come, you can run, but you can't outrun. If I find you, you'll be mine, so stay with me, your fate entwined. My blood froze. The countdown had begun, and there was no time to think. I bolted, heart pounding, feeling the ground tremble beneath me. I couldn't go back to the playground. There was no way I could risk being caught there. The woods, just beyond the park, was my only chance. It was against the rules, but then what did the rules matter anymore? Not now. We used to cheat in the game, laughing as we ran into the woods, where the shadows were thick enough to swallow us whole. Back then, it was part of the fun. But now, I prayed, no, I needed the thing haunting this place to be bound by those old rules too. For my own sanity, I needed it to be. I reached the trees, breath ragged, legs burning. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw the twisted children already moving toward the playground, their search beginning. I ducked low, hiding behind thick trunks, cradling Leah, fragile, small Leah, in my arms. She felt too light, too cold. Her form flickered and faded, but her eyes were wide with fear, still so innocent, yet so full of terror. "We can't let them find you," Leah whispered, her voice barely audible, as she buried her face in my chest. I held her tighter, my heart hammering as the sounds of their search reached me. Scratching at the slide, whispers barely heard in the breeze. They were close. I spotted the slide just beyond the treeline, the wooden beams still in place, just as they had been when we were kids. Perfect hiding spot, one of the best. But I knew the risk. If they saw me move, if they even glimpsed me, it would all be over. I took a shaky breath and, cradling Leah as carefully as I could, moved toward the slide. We made it behind the beams just in time. I heard their footsteps drawing closer, the scraping sound of something unnatural skimming the ground. I didn't dare look. I held my breath, my pulse pounding in my ears as I pressed Leah close to me. We were so close to being found. The seconds stretched into eternity. I could feel her heartbeat against mine, a fragile rhythm keeping us tethered to the world of the living. The shadows were so close, so close. One more step and I felt it. A shift in the air, a ripple in reality that made everything falter, stretch and snap like old film. The ground trembled beneath me, and then, as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. Leah's voice, small but filled with relief, fluttered through the air. "You did it, Ethan. You won." She smiled, though it was an unearthly smile, too wide, too knowing for a child. "You can go home now." But as her words hung in the air, I realized something. The game wasn't truly over. Not yet. And Leah's smile, her tone, made me realize that this was never the end. I let go of Leah, and she stepped back, her form solidifying into the unruly child I remembered. Her bright eyes and wild ponytail made her look just as she had back then. But it wasn't the same. Her eyes, those wide, innocent eyes, looked up at me, filled with a sadness I couldn't ignore. "I'm taking you back, Leah," I said softly, my voice trembling but firm. I'd left her once before, but I wouldn't do it again. "We'll leave this place together. I swear, I'll make sure nothing ever hurts you again. I'm grown now, and I'll take care of you, just like I promised all those years ago." Her tiny hand, so cold, so light, lay softly in mine as she gave a smile. But it wasn't the smile I remembered. It felt hollow, sad, like it belonged to someone else. Her voice came through faintly, as if she were speaking from somewhere far away, wrapped in sorrow. "You can't save me, Ethan," she whispered, her words curling around me like smoke. "I broke the rules a long time ago. I told you, I was the one who played alone. And now I belong to it." The air grew cold, and a heavy pressure built in my chest, sinking my heart. I shook my head, desperate. "No, that's not true. I can save you. I can still get you out of here. We'll go back home. You'll be safe. I won't leave you again." Leah's expression softened, but her eyes shimmered with something darker, something ancient, something that had been waiting too long. "It's already too late, Ethan," she said, her voice gentle, as if explaining something I couldn't understand. "It's already taken me. I've been waiting for you, just to see you one last time before I'm gone." The grief inside me twisted painfully, knowing she had waited for me. Alone in this place where the game never ended, where everything had been twisted, where the rules had been warped by something ancient and hungry. It had changed her, in ways I hadn't anticipated. My gaze drifted instinctively to the edge of the woods, and that's when I saw it. At the tree line, just beyond the reach of the light, there was something enormous beyond comprehension. A shadow or many shadows, writhing together in ways that defied logic. The shape was grotesque, an endless tangle of limbs and whispers, groaning, the sound from my childhood haunting me like 1,000 tormented souls. I took a step back, terror clenching my chest. "That?" I whispered, voice shaking. "That's what took you. Still here. I can't leave you to it, Leah." Her form flickered, as if she were beginning to disappear completely. Her voice came from all around me, like a soft wind rustling the leaves. "You can't save me, Ethan. I'm already lost to it. It's too late, but you—" Her voice trailed off, a moment of peace spreading across her face. "I saved you." My throat tightened, and I swallowed hard. Every part of me wanted to run, to drag her away from this nightmare. But as I looked at her, really looked at her, I saw the truth in her eyes. She was right. The shadows at the edge of the woods shifted again, and I felt their pull, a magnetic force dragging me toward the darkness. My chest tightened, and I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. But I didn't want to leave her. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I'll find a way. I'll fix this." Leah's smile softened, and I could have sworn I saw a tear in her eye, though it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Thank you, Ethan," she murmured, so softly I almost couldn't hear her. "But it's enough. Just knowing you care. I can let go now." Then, just like that, as if she had never been there at all, Leah faded into the air, leaving only the hollow weight of loss and sorrow behind. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had been. The weight of the shadows pressed on me, and I could hear their groans growing louder, the monster waiting just out of sight. I turned, heart heavy with the knowledge that I couldn't save her, couldn't undo what had been done. But I could still try to escape. I could still survive. The shadows closed in around me, suffocating, but a thought flickered in my mind, a spark in the darkness. I remembered the rhyme. Leah's voice echoed in my head, clear and unwavering despite the horrors surrounding me. "To escape, you must go down where they once slid, through the hollow, the dark, where the others hid." The slide. It had always been there, looming in the corner of the playground, that dark tunnel of metal twisting into the unknown. I had never dared to go down it before, but now the rhyme had given me a path, a way out, or so I hoped. My heart raced as I turned toward the slide, the one place I'd always avoided. The dark opening at the top seemed to call to me, a promise of something bad. But now it wasn't just a slide, it was a doorway, a gateway to something unspeakable. And it was waiting for me. I stepped forward, the air thick with the smell of mildew and decay. The slide groaned under the weight of the past, as if it had been waiting for me all this time. Each step felt like it was pulling me deeper into the nightmare, but I couldn't stop. The rhyme played over and over in my head, like a chant pushing me forward. I climbed the ladder slowly, my hands slick with sweat, the cold metal biting into my fingertips. The laughter, distant and warped, echoed in the air. But it wasn't the laughter of children anymore. It was something else, something hungry. When I reached the top, I paused. The opening in the slide was pure black, as if it led straight into the void. The darkness pressed against me, like 1,000 unseen eyes watching, waiting. It took every ounce of courage to push forward, to crouch and slide into the tunnel. As soon as I started, the world shifted. The air grew thick, like molasses, dragging me downward. The slide was too tight, too narrow, the walls pressing in on me. It didn't feel like metal beneath me. It felt like something alive, slick and writhing, pulling me faster and deeper, until I could barely breathe. And then the whispers began. Low, guttural murmurs that echoed through the slide. Voices. Children's voices. Leah's voice. But they weren't calling to me. They were calling for something else, something much worse. It was too late to stop it now. I couldn't move. I was trapped in the slide, racing toward whatever lay at the end. My heart pounded, my chest tight, but I couldn't scream. My mouth was dry, my breath shallow. The slide jerked suddenly, and for a moment, I thought I might be ripped apart, crushed in the dark. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I opened my eyes to find that the world around me had changed. It was still the same, but not. The air was heavy, but now there was a faint glow, coming from everywhere and nowhere. It felt like I had crossed some line, a boundary between what was real and what was not. The light filtering through the trees was soft, almost like dawn, but I knew better. This wasn't the start of a new day. The rising sun didn't erase what had happened. The warmth on my skin felt foreign, like a reminder that life had moved on without me, while I was still stuck in the echo of that twisted game. I stood there, staring into the quiet woods. The shadows had receded, but their presence lingered, heavy on my chest. Leah's voice, her laugh, the rhyme. They all felt distant now, like a fading dream I couldn't quite grasp. Her fate was sealed, and I couldn't change it. I hadn't been able to save her when it mattered, and I wouldn't be able to save her now. The truth was worse than the not knowing. The unanswered questions had always gnawed at me, but facing the truth, that she was lost to that place, bound to something ancient and hungry, was a pain I couldn't escape. I thought I might feel relief, like the horror was behind me, but I didn't. I felt empty. The sun rose higher, casting a golden light on the twisted trees, on the damp earth where the shadows had once stretched. The world around me was peaceful now, but I knew it wasn't real peace. It was a fragile calm, like the quiet after a storm, just before the next one arrives. And the worst part? I knew deep down I would never truly be free. Not really. There was no going back to how things had been before. The game wasn't over. It had only moved on, waiting for the next player. I just hoped it would be a long time before someone else had to take my place.